So, picture this. You are staring at a page of text in a foreign language.
Right. We've all been there.
Yeah, exactly. The letters are familiar. Maybe you even know like a handful of the words, but the sentence as a whole, completely impenetrable.
Oh, totally. It's like a wall.
Right. And none of the grammar rules you memorized apply. The vocabulary list you studied is nowhere to be found. Suddenly, the whole endeavor just feels completely overwhelming.
It's incredibly frustrating, yeah.
But what if the secret to breaking through that wall isn't, finding a better dictionary, but acting more like a detective at a crime scene?
I mean, it is a profound shift in perspective.
Yeah.
We usually think of learning a language as this straight path, right? You memorize the list, you learn the conjugation, and then boom, you magically speak.
Which is never how it actually works.
Exactly. Human communication is just incredibly messy. And the sources we're diving into today offer a completely different framework for handling that mess.
For sure. Our source material today is drawn from a highly respected guide designed for intermediate language learners. But honestly, whether you're actively trying to master Spanish or Japanese or just, I don't know, just want to understand the mechanics of how the human brain acquires and deploys new information, this is basically a masterclass playbook.
It really is.
Yeah.
We aren't just looking at study tips here. We're decoding the actual cognitive process of moving from total confusion to real-world fluency.
Yeah. And that's the real value.
That is the core of what we are unpacking. We're looking at a roadmap for the mind. It details how you filter overwhelming input, how you structure that data so your brain can actually retrieve it later, and this is crucial, how you navigate the intense social nuances of using that data in a live conversation.
Okay, let's unpack this and start right at the beginning, the initial encounter.
Right.
So you sit down with a piece of reading material in a new language. The instinct, and I know I do this, is to read it exactly the way you read your native language. You expect to understand every single detail.
Oh, yeah. Every single word.
Right. And the second you hit a word you don't know, you just slam on the brakes. But the guide emphatically says to stop doing that. The very first directive is to just look for the gist, the general idea.
Which is, it's incredibly difficult for high-achieving adults to accept. We just hate the feeling of missing information.
We do. It feels like failing.
Exactly. But from a cognitive load perspective, when you switch to a foreign language, your brain is already working in overdrive just to process the syntax.
Just putting the words in order is exhausting.
Right. So if you stop at every single unknown word, the cognitive friction brings your comprehension to a complete halt. You just freeze up.
So it's kind of like, well, it's like walking through a slightly dark room in an unfamiliar house.
Okay, I like this.
If you drop to your hands and knees trying to identify every single speck of dust and like the exact pattern on the rug, you're never going to make it across the room. Getting the gist is just letting your eyes adjust to the dark.
Yes. Perfect analogy.
You just need to see the shapes of the furniture so you don't break your toe. You just find your way across the room without perfect vision.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it, because you will inevitably encounter vocabulary you don't immediately recognize. You might have a vague sense of having seen it before, but you just can't pin it down.
Right.
And the source advises that instead of panicking and immediately reaching for a translation app, you should simply read through the text completely. Just let the overall context wash over you.
Now, I have to push back on the next piece of advice the source gives because, honestly, it feels incredibly dangerous.
Oh, dangerous how?
Well, the guide leans heavily on using the surrounding context to guess the meaning of a new word. But let's be real, isn't guessing just a recipe for disaster?
It definitely feels that way.
Right, like if I'm reading a French article and I guess what a verb means based on the nouns around it, aren't I risking locking in a completely wrong definition? I could go years thinking a word means to run when it actually means to escape.
That is the exact fear that paralyzes language learners. And honestly, it's why we instinctively reach for a translation the second we feel uncertain. We want that safety net.
Exactly. We want to be right.
But what's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism the source material is pointing to. When you immediately look up a translation, you're engaging in passive consumption. The answer is just handed to you on a silver platter.
Right, your brain isn't doing any work.
Exactly. Which means your brain doesn't have to do any heavy lifting.
So it slips right out of your memory like 5 minutes later.
Precisely. But guessing. Guessing is a highly active cognitive process. You are actively problem solving. The text makes a very careful distinction between passively recognizing a word and actively identifying it.
So identifying takes actual effort.
Yes. When you use the context, the tone of the paragraph, the subject matter, the words immediately preceding and following that mystery word, you are building a web of associations. Even if your guess is slightly imperfect, the mental struggle required to make that guess builds incredibly strong neural pathways.
Oh, wow. So you are basically building the scaffolding around the word before you even know exactly what it is.
Exactly. And the really fascinating part is that the guide notes that sometimes a direct translation back to your native language isn't even necessary.
Wait, really?
Yeah. If your brain has successfully used context to identify the concept, you've won. You understand the idea. Forcing it back into the rigid box of an English equivalent can sometimes actually strip away the nuance it holds in the target language.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've navigated the dark room, we didn't hit the furniture, we used our detective skills to guess the meaning of the tricky words, and we survived the initial reading.
Barely, but yes.
Right, barely. But the work isn't over. You can't just close the book and expect to speak fluently tomorrow. The guide moves into the next phase, which is cataloging the data. And they make a massive distinction here between making a note and keeping a record.
And this is where casual learners separate from serious acquirers. Making a note is, well, it's what most of us do.
It's the post-it note method.
Exactly. We scribble a word in the margins, we type it into a random note on our phone, or write it on a napkin. It is purely for short-term, immediate memory.
It's the equivalent of saving a file to your computer's RAM. The second you turn the computer off or just go to sleep, that information is completely wiped.
That is the perfect analogy. To retain this information, the guide insists you must keep a record. This is saving to the hard drive.
So it requires a real system.
Right, an organized permanent system.
Yeah.
But it's not just about writing the word and its definition. If you just write down the translation, you've only captured a flat two-dimensional shadow of the word. The source insists you have to record the word's construction.
The construction, meaning like how the word behaves in the wild.
Right. Words do not exist in a vacuum. They're mechanical parts of a larger engine. A verb might change its meaning entirely, depending on which preposition follows it.
Oh, yeah. English is terrible for that. Look at throw up versus throw out.
Exactly. A noun might require a specific gendered article. The construction tells you the shape of the puzzle piece, so you know exactly how it locks together with the other words in a sentence.
Because if you don't know the construction, it doesn't matter if you memorize the definition. You still won't be able to actually build a sentence with it. It's like buying a steering wheel but not knowing how to attach it to the car.
Yes, exactly. And beyond the mechanical construction, there is an entirely different layer of metadata you have to record: the social tone. The source puts a massive spotlight on categorizing words as formal versus informal.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because in English, we don't have extremely rigid formal and informal structures built into our grammar the way some other languages do.
We really don't.
Right, we adjust our vocabulary, sure, but we don't have entirely different verb conjugations just because we're talking to a boss instead of a buddy.
Which is exactly why English speakers often struggle with this concept. But recording the formality of a word is crucial for your social survival in a new language.
Social survival, I love that phrasing.
It's true. You can have the perfect definition and flawless construction, but if you don't know the register of the word, the formality, you are walking into a minefield.
Right. Imagine walking up to your best friend at like a casual weekend barbecue and saying, "Greetings, esteemed associate. How do you fare on this fine afternoon?"
It's completely absurd.
It's hilarious, but in a foreign language, you might make that exact mistake without even realizing it. Just because you didn't tag the word as highly formal in your records, you have the right literal definition, but the completely wrong vibe.
And the reverse is even more dangerous, honestly. Using highly informal, casual slang during a serious business negotiation or when speaking to an elder in certain cultures, that isn't just awkward, it can be deeply offensive.
Oh, definitely.
So your record-keeping system has to capture the emotional and social weight of the vocabulary, not just its mechanical definition.
Okay, so our hard drive is fully loaded. We have the vocabulary, the constructions, and the social tags. Now we hit the most terrifying part of the process.
The output phase.
Yes,
Yeah.
actually opening our mouths and speaking to another human being.
This is where theory crashes into reality.
Mm.
The cognitive load spikes massively here because you are no longer in control of the pace. When you read, you can pause, you can look away.
Right, you could take a breath.
But in a conversation, the data is coming at you in real time.
And the source material offers some very tactical advice for this exact moment. It focuses heavily on the strategic use of asking someone to repeat or explain themselves.
Yes.
Now, on the surface, that sounds obvious, but I think there's a huge psychological hurdle here for intermediate learners. We desperately want to sound fluent, you know?
And we want to impress the native speaker.
Exactly. So asking them to repeat a sentence, or worse, asking them to explain what a word means, it feels like waving a giant white flag of defeat. It feels like admitting you're stupid.
It is a massive vulnerability. But the guide frames this not as a failure, but as an aggressive active learning strategy. If you just nod and pretend to understand, you learn nothing.
And you usually end up agreeing to something you didn't mean to.
Exactly. But when you ask for an explanation in the target language, you're forcing the native speaker to provide you with a real-time, context-rich definition. You are gathering high-quality data. Overcoming that fear of looking foolish is arguably the most important skill an intermediate learner can develop.
It totally shifts the mindset from I am failing a test to I am conducting an interview.
I love that.
And speaking of active strategies, the text also casually drops this advice to just pronounce new words repeatedly to yourself.
Yes. Getting your mouth used to making the physical sounds. Language is not just a mental exercise. It is deeply physiological.
It's motor cortex training. You are literally training the muscles in your face and your tongue and your throat to move in ways they have never moved before.
It's muscle memory.
Right. Talking to yourself in the shower or the car is how you build that physical muscle memory. So when you are in a high-stress conversation, your mouth actually knows how to form the shapes.
Because if you rely purely on mental understanding and you neglect the physical pronunciation practice, you will freeze up when it's time to speak. Your brain will know the word, but your mouth literally won't know how to execute it.
Which brings us to a really fascinating breakdown the guide provides regarding the different types of social interaction. It specifically categorizes the environments where you will be using this vocabulary. It divides them into chats, discussions, and arguments.
This is a really important distinction.
Now, I understand why we need to separate a friendly chat from a serious discussion. That maps perfectly onto our formal versus informal record keeping. But why specifically highlight an argument? Isn't an argument really just a passionate discussion?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of cognitive performance under stress, highlighting the argument is actually brilliant. A discussion, even a serious one, is usually governed by logic and mutual respect.
Right.
The cognitive load is manageable. You can carefully select your formal vocabulary and focus on your construction. But an argument introduces a totally different variable: adrenaline.
Oh, wow. The emotional temperature completely skyrockets.
Exactly. When people disagree angrily, the pace of the language accelerates, the vocabulary becomes highly idiomatic, and the social grace periods just disappear. For a language learner, knowing the emotional temperature of the room is critical because adrenaline restricts your access to your brain's higher functions.
Oh, man. So when you get stressed in an argument, you literally lose access to that beautiful, organized hard drive of vocabulary you built.
Yes, you revert to your most basic, deeply ingrained instincts. If you haven't aggressively practiced and categorized your vocabulary, an argument will completely strip away your intermediate skills, and you will find yourself stuttering like a day-one beginner.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. The guide highlights this to remind learners that the social environment dictates not just which words are appropriate, but how easily your brain will be able to retrieve them.
That makes total sense. It's like training for a sport, right? You can perfectly execute a drill in an empty gym, but doing it with a defender aggressively in your face is an entirely different neurological task. You have to know what kind of game you're walking into.
Which perfectly sets up the final and really the most crucial phase of the guide's framework, taking the leap into the unknown.
The brave step. The guide explicitly commands the learner to hunt for opportunities to practice and to actively experiment with the language. I absolutely love this framing. It takes the pressure off. You aren't taking a final exam. You are a mad scientist in a laboratory.
It is a deeply liberating mindset. When you experiment, you're testing a hypothesis. You take that brand new, highly formal construction you mapped out on your hard drive, you drop it into a conversation with a native speaker, and you just watch the reaction.
Do their eyes glaze over? Do they laugh because it was completely inappropriate for the setting? Or do they nod in perfect understanding?
Exactly. Whatever happens, you're just collecting data.
And that data collection requires you to reframe how you view failure. The source makes a very specific point here, and it's actually rooted in English phrasing. It says we must not worry about making mistakes. Notice the verb. In many languages, the direct translation would be to do a mistake, But in English, we make mistakes.
Make, not do. That is a brilliant little semantic detail.
Right.
It's profound if you think about it. Doing implies executing a predefined task poorly, but making implies creation. When you make a mistake in a language, you have actively constructed something. You synthesized your understanding of the vocabulary, the grammar, and the tone, and you built a sentence.
It might be structurally unsound, but you created it.
Exactly. Making a mistake is a feature of the learning process, not a bug. It is the exact mechanism by which you calibrate your understanding.
Okay, but this raises a really practical question. If I'm just running around my city, acting like a mad scientist, experimenting wildly and making all these glorious mistakes, how do I actually lock the correct information into my brain long term? Like if I make a mistake and get corrected, how do I ensure I don't just make the exact same mistake tomorrow?
This raises an important question, and honestly, it is the exact trap many intermediate learners fall into. They love the chatting and the experimenting, but then they plateau.
They just get stuck.
Right. The guide's answer is unglamorous, but absolutely essential. Revision. You have to constantly revisit and revise the vocabulary records you built.
So you have to go back to the hard drive.
Frequently.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the psychological phenomenon known as the forgetting curve, your brain actively and aggressively discards information it doesn't think it needs to survive.
It just dumps it.
Yep. If you do all that hard work, getting the gist, guessing from context, identifying the word, writing down the construction, and even experimenting with it once, it will still fade away if you do not purposefully review it.
Revision is the glue. It tells your brain, hey, this data is actually critical for my survival. Please do not debut it.
Exactly. It moves the information from short-term experimentation into long-term subconscious mastery. And this brings us to what I think is the most empowering piece of advice in the entire source text. After laying out this incredibly rigorous framework, the guide simply states, find a method that works for you.
Which feels like a contradiction at first. They just gave us a masterclass on exactly how to do this, and then they say, do whatever works.
I know, but it's not a contradiction. It's an acknowledgement of cognitive diversity. The underlying framework is universal, right? You must filter input, organize the data, engage physical memory, navigate social tone, and combat the forgetting curve.
Right, those are non-negotiable.
Exactly. But the tactics you use to execute that framework are entirely personal.
Right. Some people might need to color code their vocabulary records to separate formal from informal.
Oh, absolutely.
Others might rely entirely on auditory repetition in the car. Some might learn best by throwing themselves into high-stakes arguments, while others might prefer carefully structured, calm discussions.
The correct method is simply the one that keeps you engaged enough to actually do it consistently. The ultimate goal is to find the path of least resistance for your specific brain to process this overwhelming amount of data.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at the journey we've mapped out today, we are looking at a complete cognitive transformation. You start as an overwhelmed reader, stepping into a dark room, learning to tolerate ambiguity just to get the gist.
Right.
Then you become a detective, using context clues to build mental scaffolding and actively identifying meaning rather than passively consuming translations.
And then you transition into an archivist, building a robust hard drive of vocabulary that meticulously tracks not just definitions, but structural mechanics and the crucial social nuances of formal versus informal tone.
And then you step out of the laboratory and into the wild. You face the vulnerability of asking for explanations. You train your physical motor cortex to produce new sounds. You learn to read the emotional temperature of a room, knowing that an argument requires a totally different neurological response than a chat.
It's a huge shift.
It is. And finally, you embrace the identity of a mad scientist. You actively make mistakes to gather data, you revise that data to fight the forgetting curve, and you continuously tweak your personal methods until you find the perfect formula for your brain.
It is a tremendously rigorous process, but it's deeply rewarding. And I think it leaves us with a really fascinating, broader implication to ponder.
Oh.
Yeah. We've seen how acquiring a language requires us to constantly analyze the emotional tone of a room. It forces us to ask questions when we feel confused, to embrace intense vulnerability, and to actively experiment and fail in front of other human beings.
Yeah, you really have to put yourself out there.
Exactly. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, is learning a new language really just about acquiring new vocabulary? Or is the struggle of mastering a foreign language actually a covert method for building a braver, more empathetic, and fundamentally more adaptable version of your own personality?
Wow. That is an incredible way to look at it. The vocabulary words are just the weights in the gym. The real project, the thing you are actually building, is you.
Precisely.
Well, we hope this deep dive has given you a powerful new framework for your own learning journey, whether you're tackling a new language or just trying to master any complex new skill. Keep experimenting, keep embracing those mistakes, and keep diving deep. See you next time.